And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce our opening speaker, Professor John Sterman. He is the J.W. Forrester Professor of Management here at the MIT Sloan School, and his research centers on improving decision-making in complex systems. He pioneered the development of management flight simulators, one of which you're about to see, that are used by corporate leaders, universities, and governments to guide decision-making around the world. He's won numerous prizes, but as a student, I would like to highlight his teaching awards. At MIT, he was recognized with the Samuel E. Siegel Faculty Prize, given to a professor who inspires students in pursuing and achieving excellence, as well as the Jameson Award for Excellence in Teaching. He holds an AB in Engineering and Environmental Systems from Dartmouth College, as well as a PhD in System Dynamics from MIT. So if you'll join me in welcoming Professor Sterman to the stage.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
So thank you, and I'm delighted to be here. I just want to say one thing before we get started, which is, as you may know, the Sustainability Summit is entirely led, organized, and run by students, and they do a fantastic job. So can we get a little recognition for them? All right. So they asked me to speak, and my view on the theme for this year's conference, Adaptation in a Warming World, I told them, well, I'm going to be a bit of a contrarian. And so I've changed the title of my talk here. I want to speak to you about the role of mitigation. Adaptation, of course, is absolutely necessary. We are already in a world that's warmed about 1.5 degrees C, 2.7 Fahrenheit above pre-industrial. We're already feeling the impacts of that. Greenhouse gas emissions are at an all-time record, and there's no doubt we're going to have to do a better job at adaptation. Have to do that. But that's not anywhere near sufficient. And I got to tell you, having been in the climate policy world for several decades now, it would be easy for everyone to get discouraged because emissions have kept going up. The COP process under the UNFCCC hasn't delivered binding agreements. There's a lot of cynicism now about whether emissions will ever fall. And you see a lot of this, right? So here, the adaptation imperative, insufficient progress on mitigation, more global warming is guaranteed, no choice but to surge ahead with adaptation. Of course, a lot of the effort in the last few years has been around payments from the wealthy countries to the developing countries for loss and damage that they have and will incur. That's about adaptation. The European Environment Agency says extreme weather makes climate change adaptation a top priority. And a lot of folks, including people who have worked hard to make a difference on emissions and limit climate change, they're saying things like this. Net zero by 2050, utterly implausible. We're on track to warm at least 3°C or more this century, and then the implication is give up on mitigation, it's not working, focus on adaptation. So I want everybody to hear me really clearly. We have to adapt, and we're going to have to help those who are less fortunate and have been historically disadvantaged and don't have the resources. We're going to help them to adapt. But it is absolutely not enough. What does the IPCC say? They say that if we get to 3 degrees or more, and actually not even 3 degrees, that it will cause severe impacts and significant irreversibility with limited ability to adapt. In plain language, that's catastrophe. And I know I'm putting my reputation as a scientist on the line when I use that word. It sounds inflammatory and exaggerated to some. But listen, suppose you went to your doctor and you said, you know, doc, I don't feel well. I have these unexplained fevers. I'm hot all the time. My muscles are sore. I don't have the strength I should have. I can't work effectively, and my brain is foggy all the time. Help me. And the doc says, well, okay, we're going to run all the tests we can. We're going to find out what's going on. Doctor comes back and says, please sit down because I got to tell you, you're suffering from a condition that's leading to severe and irreversible consequences, and there's almost nothing we can do for you. I think most people would consider that a pretty devastating, catastrophic diagnosis. That's where we're headed without mitigation. Now, We're already feeling the effects of climate change, right? The World Health Organization and many others estimate at least 8 million people die prematurely every year from air pollution. That's more than the death toll from smoking around the world, and orders of magnitude more than people who die from guns and car accidents. And this is almost all produced by burning fossil fuels. We have sea level rise. There's a picture of Boston with ordinary sunny day flooding down at the seaport. And you look at these signs, right? On roadways in coastal communities, salt water, no wake. And then it gets so bad they even put proper metal signs up. No wake zone on our streets. And this is what's happening today. Crop yields are falling because of climate change. No diving from the bridge. You might think that was self-explanatory, but wildfires and climate refugees, it's getting worse and worse, and this is today. So what I want to do is make the case that while we must adapt, adaptation without mitigation is futile. So I'm going to do that with the En-ROADS climate simulation model. Could I quickly see who's ever seen it or used it before? Quite a few of you. Great. As you know, it's completely free. It's available in 21 languages here. And I'm not going to take time to explain what's going on, but take a look at this base case simulation. This is total primary energy around the world. Coal down here, oil, gas, renewables, wind, solar, hydro, geothermal here, bioenergy, and nuclear. And we're expecting, everybody is expecting, growth in energy demand as population grows and developing countries become more affluent, and as all the already affluent countries become even more affluent. Well, that leads to this pattern of greenhouse gas emissions. The gray area, by far the largest contributor to climate change, is the CO2 from burning the coal, oil, and gas that you see here. Second biggest contributor is methane, that's the light blue. Third is CO2 from deforestation and land degradation. And then we have the other greenhouse gases, nitrous oxide, and all the different fluorinated gases. The key thing here is energy demand grows. Most of the growth is met by renewables, but we're not in the baseline getting rid of the fossil. So emissions go up a little bit and stabilize, and that leads to 3.3 C, 6 degrees Fahrenheit of warming by 2100, and you can see the temperature pathway here. It means we're on track to breach the 2-degree threshold by mid-century. What are the consequences of that? Well, I just showed you a few slides of what's happening now, but let's take a little bit of a closer look at what might happen in the future. So this is sea level rise in 2050 in the Gulf Coast of the United States. And all of this dark blue is land that's lost permanently to sea level rise. Now, it's actually over-optimistic because we know we get hurricanes in this area, and a medium to large hurricane could have a storm surge of 3 to 4 meters. I'll just give 3 meters here. It takes a moment, and I am connected to the internet. We'll move on if it doesn't. Well, devastation, and I invite you later to look at any region in the world. But what else? Oh, there you go. Boy, that took a long time. This would be devastating to a strategically important and heavily populated region of our country. Well, what else is going on? So this is the likelihood of prolonged drought, not just a short term. And this is 2020, so roughly now. And if you look at the colors down here, we're already very, very dry and experiencing severe drought with high probability in the southwest of the United States and into Mexico, Central America, South America, also in the Mediterranean basin. But that's now. What happens as we go forward towards that well over 3-degree future? That's going to be a huge threat to food production, to the ability of people to even live in these areas, and these are heavily populated and agriculturally important areas. What about, let's look at wildfire danger. So this is, again, roughly now, and the brighter the color, the hotter the color, the more high wildfire danger days there are per year. There's already been an increase. This is compared to pre-industrial, but let's take a look at what happens as we go forward to 2100. almost all of the United States, well, all of the United States pretty much, and a huge swath of Canada, Europe, Central South America, Africa, you can look at the rest of the world, will be experiencing high sustained risks of wildfire. The fires that are going to result in a drying, hotter world are going to make what just happened in Los Angeles look like your backyard barbecue. There's many more things we could look at, but the point I want to make is there's a confluence of severe impacts across multiple dimensions. We also track among the impacts in the model. We've enhanced the model. We look at things like how much reduction in labor productivity there's going to be. How about air pollution? This is that air pollution, PM 2.5 emissions. Almost all of this is from energy. Almost all of that is from your fossil fuels. And this is what's killing millions and millions of people every year prematurely, and causing lung disease, and hurting labor productivity, and hurting the cognitive and other developmental progress of our kids, and their life outcomes will be compromised. What else? Oh gosh, I can't go through them all, but what happens to crop yield? Crop yields are expected to fall relative to what they would have been significantly. In a world where the UN tells us we need to feed 2 billion more people by the 2070s, 80s. These are not things that you're going to be able to adapt away. You're going to do what we can, we're going to have to, but there are so many overlapping, interacting harms from climate change that there's no meaningful adaptation in a world that warm. I mean, there's many more we could look at. I'm not going to take the time. I invite you to do that. So what can we do about it? Well, I think what we're going to have to do is refocus on mitigation. So let's take a look at what we might be able to do. Normally, the way we use this simulation is we invite the audience to suggest what to do. Research shows that showing people research doesn't work, right? If I tell you what to do, you're not likely to change your mind. Unfortunately, we don't have time for that this morning, so let me just take a few minutes and pull some of the sliders to represent different kinds of policies and actions that we can do with today's technology that can bend that emissions curve down, and then we'll see what that might mean for some of the impacts. So one of the high leverage points that also helps with adaptation is improving the efficiency, speeding up improvements in efficiency in the built environment, so buildings, residential, commercial, and industrial facilities of all kinds. That took already 0.3 of a degree off of the warming. That's a huge impact. There's tremendous potential there. We can also improve the efficiency of our transport system. This isn't just switching to electric cars, it's also mode shifting. So, for example, more bike lanes, more trains and buses. I ride my bike to MIT every day. I rode this morning. Wet weather doesn't matter. By far the best way to commute. By far. Driving is the worst way. It's, yeah. And so more efficient vehicles, but mode shifting, that makes more difference. We need to work on restoring the natural environment that we've already compromised. So nature-based carbon dioxide removal can make a difference. This is afforestation, reforestation. We need to cut the emissions from agriculture. We need to cut emissions of methane and other greenhouse gases that are coming from waste and leakage through the energy supply chain. Now we're down to 2.4. Let's cut deforestation, slow that down. We're at 2.1. We can notice that there's still quite a lot of fossil in the system. That's why we're still well above the 2-degree target from Paris. So what else must we do? Well, we need to put a meaningful price on carbon. You and everybody in the world pretty much right now has the ability to use as much fossil-based energy as you can and want to and not pay what it truly costs. That needs to be fixed. So what if we put a meaningful price on carbon, and to preserve equity and advance social justice, take every dollar of revenue from that carbon price and give it back to the people of every country as a carbon dividend. Now, a lot of people tell me, that's impossible, that's never going to happen. Well, guess what? Anything that exists is possible. The World Bank keeps their carbon price dashboard, which shows you 110 countries or provinces in the world already have carbon pricing, and Canada has this dividend policy. So if you're Canadian, the revenue, every dollar of revenue that they collect through their carbon pricing system comes back to the people of Canada as what they call a carbon rebate. And if you're in the economically disadvantaged lower half of the income distribution, your carbon footprints are pretty small because your income is relatively small. You don't have a huge house. You don't have several houses. You don't fly that much. You don't drive big SUVs. You are maybe on the bus and living in a small apartment. So carbon price raises the cost of energy and food and everything that you're going to buy, but you get back more than those extra costs. So this advances social justice and equity and poverty reduction. This is happening right now today. So if we go back to our scenario, where are we? We're at 1.9 degrees. And we've done it with things that we know how to do today. There will, of course, be costs. There will be costs to this, but there's also benefits. And a lot of the dire predictions that you hear that say, well, gosh, we could have a green transition, but it's going to cost 10, 20, 30, 40 trillion dollars, and that's never going to happen. Those projections, I believe, are inflated. A lot of these actions here have positive net present value and generate other benefits that make them cost saving in many cases and cost effective. But people tend to focus too much on the short-term costs and not enough on the benefits. So let's take a look at that. If we go back to here and take a look at what's happening with all of these, oops, no, that's not what I wanted to do. We can do it here. What happens to all of the harms from our base case scenario here? What are the consequences? Well, everything that's getting worse creates real economic harm and, of course, increases morbidity and mortality. So those economic harms come, well, every time there's a severe hurricane, as we just had with Milton and Helene just this year in just the Gulf, every sheet of plywood, every yard of concrete, every ton of steel that's used to rebuild, that's a piece of plywood, a yard of concrete, and a ton of steel that is not available to grow new businesses or build new housing that we so desperately need. That's real economic harm. So what's the consequence of all of those harms? This is controversial, but here is one, I believe, over-optimistic assessment from a well-regarded peer-reviewed study of what would happen to global GDP per capita, real economic output per capita, as we go forward in a world leading to 6 Fahrenheit 3.3 of warming. So the dashed line is what economic growth per capita would be if climate change had no further impact on the economy, something we know is dead wrong. The solid line is what economic growth per capita would be given this scenario of 3.3. Personally, I think, given the most recent evidence about how quickly the climate is changing and how broad and deep the harms are, I think this is over-optimistic. But that's fine. We'll stick with it for right now. So the economy still grows. People on average are getting more affluent. And sometimes when I present this, people say, OK, a few basis points of slower economic growth, what's the big deal? You see that little drop right there? That's the economic harm from COVID. What's coming at us from climate change makes COVID look like an insignificant blip. This is millions, hundreds of millions, billions of people in the developing world not being able to rise out of poverty and join the emerging global middle class. And by the way, when I present this to businesses, many of them realize, yeah, that means the growth in our customer base is going to be much slower. That's bad for our business. So what happens if we can mitigate cut emissions with efficiency, a price on carbon, nature-based solutions, et cetera. We're down here to 1.9. Let's take a look at the temperature pathway. We stay under the Paris target of 2, but that's still warmer than we are today. So no matter what we do, things are going to get worse than they are today. And that's one of the reasons that we must invest in adaptation, especially for the least of us, those who have contributed the least to the problem but are least able to adapt. That's people in the developing world, and in this country, it's anybody in an economically or socioeconomically depressed, disadvantaged community, whether it's in Mississippi or Mattapan, just a few miles from here. But what happens to the economy? Well, let's take a look at real GDP per capita. At 1.9, worse than today, there's still some loss, but economic growth is much faster, much higher, and it will be more equitably and broadly distributed around the world. This is what we can do with mitigation. Adaptation doesn't do that. So, can we get out of the trap we're in? And it is a trap. Let's take a look at what's going on. So, I think we are already at the early stages of an adaptation trap, an adaptation death spiral. So how does that work? Well, you've got global warming there, which leads to climate damage, sea level rise, extreme weather, floods, droughts, wildfires, crop failures, hunger, disease, migration, conflict, and war, and more. But why is it a trap? Well, warming increases, there's more climate damage, more resources are deployed and marshaled for adaptation and emergency response. That's what everybody's beginning to focus on. Oh, mitigation isn't going to work. It's never going to happen. Give up. Just get used to it, and let's prepare for the warmer world. Well, we're going to have to do a lot of that, but if we do, resources for mitigation are going to go down. Why? Well, because you can only spend $1 once. But even more subtly, the more we focus on adaptation and the more successful it appears to be, it relaxes the pressure for mitigation. Oh, my house is on stilts now, people say, so I'm not really worried about sea level rise. I don't need to become active for mitigation. And anyway, mitigation, I'm small. My carbon footprint is tiny, or my state or my country's carbon footprint is tiny. And it's what China and India do that really matters. And I have no influence over that, so it's frustrating and I'm going to give up. So resources for mitigation go down. That means emissions go up some more. Warming gets worse. More climate damage. The urgency of adaptation grows even further. There's even fewer resources for mitigation. Emissions go up even more. Warming gets worse. Damage gets worse. And around we go. Pretty soon, we're in a world of literal firefighting. Now, I and my colleagues have studied safety and accidents in industrial processes for many, many years. And if you get into this trap in a factory or an oil refinery or a chemical plant or the way you maintain your vehicle, it sucks you in. So I'll give you a real life example, and there are sadly hundreds of them. You'll all remember the Deepwater Horizon accident. Well, this wasn't just an accident that happened, nobody's fault. The platform, the Deepwater Horizon platform, had been in service without significant maintenance for years, well beyond the normal cycle for taking it out of service and doing major refit so it would be safe and productive. The backlog of deferred maintenance got bigger and bigger and bigger, and they just focused on fixing whatever was the latest emergency. And because things would break down and that would slow down their ability to drill, it was an exploration platform. There was more time pressure to complete the well they were working on, the Macondo well. And then what happened is the disaster. 11 people died. It It was the worst oil spill in US history. The oil flowed for many, many months. And if you go down to the bayous in Louisiana and you dig a little bit into the muck, you'll find oil there still from that spill. That's what happens in industrial settings. What's happening here is on a larger, more massive scale. We will be sucked into a domain where all of our resources, which won't be enough, will be devoted to fighting the latest fire, dealing with the latest floods and storms, trying to mobilize food relief for people who are hungry because crops have failed. It's a no-win story. It's a death spiral. So what can we do about that? We've got to mitigate. We've got to adapt. So one way, not the only way, and part of it is we should just suck it up and recognize that we've been living in a world where we don't pay the true costs of the fossil fuels we use, and we should start charging a meaningful carbon price and give the money back to the people. This, by the way, is, of course, the freedom-preserving policy. Nobody tells you what kind of car to drive, what kind of house to have, whether you should fly. It's just that you're going to pay something closer to the true cost of those activities. But you still decide, you're in charge. But the other really important thing here is to combine adaptation and mitigation. And this idea we call multisolving, and I didn't invent it. It's due to my friend and colleague, Beth Sawin, who was a co-founder of Climate Interactive, the group that we collaborate with to develop the En-ROADS model. It's adaptation and mitigation together. It's actions that reduce emissions and simultaneously help us adapt by improving our resiliency, our individual, national, and global security, our health, improving equity, and ultimately, as I just showed you, improving prosperity. So what might some of those actions be? Here's a tiny partial list, and I'm sure you can think of many more. Highly efficient buildings, like this one, like the new Sloan School building across the way there, but especially deep energy retrofits that dramatically improve the energy efficiency and lower the emissions of housing, and especially low-income housing. Why especially? Because the owners and the occupants of low-income housing don't have the resources to do it themselves. So they're going to need some assistance. That improves resilience. That improves equity because it lowers utility bills while you're lowering emissions. If you combine that with microgrids powered by rooftop, community solar, maybe some wind where it's appropriate, and district geothermal, you've created a much more resilient environment. Some of you may remember Winter Storm Uri, better known as the ice apocalypse that hit Texas in 2023. Temperatures dropped to 17 below Fahrenheit. 250 people died, freezing to death or poisoned by carbon monoxide from running generators in their homes. There were several district geothermally heated communities in Oklahoma and Texas where the lights didn't go out, the power stayed on, and the houses stayed warm. That's resilience. That's multi-solving, because those also have low emissions. You can see the rest of the list here. Planting trees in cities lowers the urban heat island effect, lowers the need for air conditioning, lowers emissions. Bike lanes, we need more safe bike lanes. Cambridge and Boston have done some good work here. I ride every day. About half the way, I'm in a protected bike lane. The other half, I'm dueling with the vehicles. We need to do better on that. CSAs, local food, preserving our forests, our wetlands, and our mangroves. That's lowering emissions, it sequesters carbon, and mangroves prevent flooding from sea level rise. I have building civic muscle here. What is that? That's getting together. During these extreme events like Hurricane Helene that hit North Carolina. North Carolina, by the way, was on the list of safe places to live in a warming world. And then Helene hit, caused many deaths, devastated the community. A lot of our team at Climate Interactive lived there. They spent the days and weeks after the event with no power and no water of their own, getting out there to try to reach the people that no one had heard from to see if they were even alive and what assistance they needed. And then they spent more days and weeks carrying water to the upper floors of apartments so that the retirees and other folks who couldn't carry that water themselves might be able to flush their toilets. They called it the Flush Brigade. That's a kind of adaptation. People get together and help each other, but we need to do that in advance. We need to do it more all the time, not just after the hurricane or the flood or the fire. You can see the rest. There are many, many more. Some of them may sound like they can't make that much of a difference, but look, every 1/10 of a degree matters. And even if we're not able to do this, every 1/10 of a degree that we can prevent gives us more time, saves lives, improves the economy, builds our security. So, can we do it? For sure. Will we do it? That's up to you. Don't listen to the people who say it's too late. Mitigation is never going to happen. The fossil fuel industry is too powerful and opposes it. Don't listen to that. Take heart from the civil rights movement. It was many, many decades of activism before the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act were passed, 1964, 65, and many more decades since then. Those activists were vilified. They were attacked by dogs, sprayed with fire hoses. They were burned out of their churches. They were bombed. They were killed. But they didn't give up. They didn't say, well, you know, there's always been racism. There always will be racism. There's nothing we can do about it. Let's just learn to live in that world. Let's adapt. They didn't do that. They kept their eyes on the prize. And although there's plenty of discrimination and racism and inequity in the world today, the struggle for human rights is never over. The progress has been meaningful. That would not have happened if they said, let's just adapt. So let's get busy. It is not going to be easy. It's a fight, but we can do it. And it's going to be worth it. Thank you. All right, Jen.
Thanks, John.
It's over to you.
Awesome.
I'm just going to get this stuff out of here.
Can everybody hear me? Can we just please give another round of applause to John Sterman for setting the tone for today?